Welcome to episode 109 of the Eat for Endurance podcast, where we explore the connection between nutrition, performance, and health for busy, active people. My name is Claire Shorenstein, and I am a board-certified sports dietitian and endurance athlete with over 10 years of experience working with teenage and adult athletes of all abilities. I started this podcast over 5 years ago to provide evidence-based guidance, inspiring athlete stories, and practical tips on a wide variety of nutrition topics so that you can fuel better, crush your endurance goals, and thrive as a human being. Today, I have Hayden James of Satiate Nutrition for you. She is joining me to talk about blood sugar monitoring among non-diabetic athletes. Hayden is a sports dietitian. She's a certified diabetes care and education specialist, and she's also the conference director for the inaugural 2025 Fuel Fest, which is an endurance and sports nutrition conference for healthcare professionals. Hayden's also an avid trail runner, climber, skier, and lifter based in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I just thought she'd be such a great fit for this topic, and I know you will too. Maintaining healthy blood sugars as part of overall health is so important, as I'm sure you know, but there's a lot of confusion surrounding what this actually means. Plus, many athletes are afraid of carbs and especially of sugar, and they're taking blood sugar monitoring to the extreme with the use of continuous glucose monitors, otherwise known as CGMs. Hayden and I break down why blood sugar is such a hot topic, both within and outside of the athletic community, what actually causes blood sugar to increase. We differentiate between acute and chronic glucose elevations, why a blood sugar spike in itself is not actually a bad thing, the use of CGMs among athletes, and so much more. We actually recorded this episode a few months ago. I am so excited to finally share it with you today. And for any healthcare professionals listening, registration opens for Fuel Fest on February 17th. You can go check it out at www.fuel-fest.com. I'm definitely signing up myself. All right, here's my discussion with Hayden James on blood sugar monitoring among athletes. Hayden, welcome to the podcast. It's been a while. We've been trying to get you on the show, so I'm really stoked that you're here with me today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Thanks for your patience with my rescheduling.
Yeah, of course. Well, you are a busy lady working in the clinic, and I know that's kind of your, well, not quite full-time gig, but it keeps you very busy. So I appreciate you spending time with me. So before we dive into today's topic, can you just share a little background as both an athlete and a dietitian?
Yeah, I'll share my professional background first. So I am a dietitian and I am a board-certified sports dietitian and then board-certified diabetes educator. So I work in an outpatient endocrinology clinic 32 hours a week. So most of the clientele I'm seeing have type 1, type 2, or gestational diabetes. And then I have my own private practice where I work predominantly with endurance athletes. So mostly ultra endurance. I'm based in Salt Lake City. So people are doing a lot of ultra endurance running, cycling, ski touring, rock climbing. So those are the primary clients that I'm serving. And then my sports background is I identify as an athlete. I do lots of different things. I love to run. I've been running for 20 years. I do trail races mostly, like short and verty things to 50K and verty. I ski tour, I rock climb, and I strength train. And I just like being outside. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen some of your race photos. It looks pretty badass. You're like just climbing a mountain, basically. It looks pretty cool.
It's power hiking.
Power, yeah, I know, right? I mean, can we even call it running? I know,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Totally. Power hiking. Yes, absolutely. So we're going to be chatting all about blood sugar monitoring in non-diabetics with a focus on endurance athletes. So really taking all of your knowledge that you have as someone who works with diabetes very, very frequently, but also kind of interweaving it with your endurance athlete population. And I know whenever I have like a really complicated case that is, with type 1 or type 2 diabetes or some sort of blood sugar or something. And I just immediately think of you. And I know I've like kind of sent some people your way. I don't know if they end up working with you, but I'm just like, I should probably like refer them to Hayden if it feels like a little too much for me, because I know you have such a background there. So we're going to really dig into that stuff. And I think it would be really helpful to I always like to set the stage with the topics, right? Make sure everyone, in case they're new to this topic, they really understand the landscape of just like why blood sugar is something that we should even care about, why it's such a hot topic, both, in and outside of the athletic world.
The rates of prediabetes and diabetes, which are issues with blood sugars, are climbing. So it's an area where people are starting to care more and more about and hear more about. And having those blood sugar complications when blood sugar is too high for too long affect other areas of our body, our cardiovascular system, our kidneys. So anywhere blood sugar goes can be affected. And then there's that other kind of weight loss industry area where the industry loves to latch on to anything and everything to monetize it and make you afraid of it so that you will buy whatever product. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we were offline speaking briefly on GLP-1 meds and kind of just comparing notes there about some athletes of ours that, may have been recommended. Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add. I mean, we're going to go into this topic in more depth, but yeah, no, I don't have too much more to offer there other than it's something that, I mean, we should care about. Obviously, our body is set up in a way that if everything is going well, like our body should be able to keep blood sugars within a normal range, right? You get lab work done, you test your fasting glucose, you test your hemoglobin A1C, you can test your fasting insulin. I mean, you can look at all these markers to kind of see if you're in a healthy state in terms of your metabolism or endocrine system and all this stuff. And I think as we'll kind of get into, there are people, and this is always in the athlete world, right, where people get a little bit too obsessed with numbers and data and just tracking things. And so, yeah, before I get a little too ahead of myself, I think just to kind of bring it back to basics, because truly a lot of people do not understand how some of this works. Can you review just which foods actually cause blood sugar to increase and how different combinations of foods can also impact blood sugar?
Yeah, so the macronutrient that has the most impact on our blood sugar are carbohydrates. Protein and fat can have some indirect effects on our blood sugar, but to keep things simple, it is really the carbohydrates that raise our blood sugar. We break down all of our carbs into the simplest form of sugar, which is glucose. So whether we're eating Sour Patch Kids, which are my favorite candy, or quinoa or black beans, the end product is glucose. And that is a preferred fuel source by our body. And we transport that glucose everywhere in the body because we need to convert it into energy.
Yeah. And I remember in my clinical days when I was working with a diabetic population, it would always be this thing where, we'd be educating on nutrition labels and everyone always wanted to look at added sugars, which yes, of course we can look at added sugars, but you have to remind people, you also have to look at total carbohydrate. It's the carbohydrate that also impacts things. And of course, yes, fiber can modulate a response and protein and fat and all this stuff, but people kind of were just so fixated on looking at the sugar part and they weren't as, focused on the actual total carbohydrate part. Do you have anything else you want to say about that?
I think it's partially because the food label is kind of confusing. And I think a lot of people don't understand that there's multiple types of carbohydrates. And so I think really just the differences between carbs and simpler sugars and added sugars on that food label get kind of confusing. Other things that will impact the blood sugar besides the total amount of carbs is kind of what types of carbs they are. So are they more complex carbs? So they're bigger chains that are slower to break down, starch being one of those, fiber being one of those, versus sugars are really small carbohydrates. They break down more rapidly into simple sugars. They might affect blood sugar quicker than the more complex carbohydrates. But
yeah,
other foods impact our blood sugar too. We have those carbs with protein and fat, or we have them in isolation. Those are going to impact things as well.
I think that's what people sometimes forget. They're so focused on what will spike my blood sugar. And it's well, are you having a balanced meal? If you want to have something that has sugar in it and you're also combining it with other things, again, I'm assuming a healthy population here when I'm talking about this stuff. But yeah. I mean, is that really a big deal? Probably not. No. As long as you have a healthy metabolism, as long as your insulin and all the other things are acting normally and you're able to kind of get that sugar out of the bloodstream into the cells and all that stuff, then maybe we're not so worried about it, right? So I think that's something to keep in mind. Other than food, what else may impact blood sugar control? Because of course, that isn't the only thing that sometimes can affect blood sugar.
Yeah. So if we think about eating is going to raise blood sugar. Other things that could raise blood sugar could be excessive stress. Cortisol is a hormone that can cause what we call transient insulin resistance. So think temporary insulin resistance. And actually I should probably define insulin resistance and like what insulin is doing, because this might be kind of confusing. We have to get just for our listeners, we have to get our sugar from that blood glucose, that blood sugar from the blood into the cell where it's converted into energy, life-sustaining function. And that sugar has to go through a specific door along our cell wall, and that door has to be unlocked. When we eat and that blood sugar starts to rise, our body releases the hormone insulin. And you can think of insulin as a bunch of tiny keys that go around and unlock the doors to the cells. So it unlocks the door and the sugar is able to leave the bloodstream and get into the cell where it needs to go. And that is lowering blood sugar. Whenever you hear the term insulin resistance, that is associated with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. And that is kind of a defect in how we're using our insulin. So I liken it to think of your keyholes being rusty. And so the insulin key is having a hard time unlocking all of those doors to the cell. So if it's having a hard time unlocking the doors, then you're going to have sugar build up in the bloodstream more, and the body has to make more and more insulin because it's saying, oh, I keep sensing the blood sugar is high. Let me release more insulin in hopes to find some keyholes that it can unlock. And physical activity can lower blood sugar by immediately pulling sugar out of the bloodstream in the absence of insulin, but it also can have, for lack of a better term, a lubrication effect of those keyholes. So it helps your body use the insulin the way it should. So to circle back to cortisol influencing insulin resistance, actually, I'd completely forgotten where I was going with that. I'm glad I found it. I found it again. Cortisol here. Like excessive cortisol release could influence that insulin resistance. So it could cause blood sugars to hang out a little bit higher. And then conversely, like I mentioned, physical activity helps lower blood sugars by two ways, immediately and improving our insulin sensitivity. So the lubrication effect, opposite of insulin resistance.
Awesome. Love it. We got there.
Yeah, we got there.
We got there. Yeah, I remember back when I was doing like diabetes education, nutrition education, the kind of analogy I used to use was hotel key cards. And like, when your hotel key card just like stops working and it's like, and then you're like just trying to get in, you can't get in. That's kind of similar analogy, essentially.
Yeah.
So instead of rusty keyholes, it was a hotel key card that was dysfunctional, basically.
Love that.
Anywho, going back a little bit to the spike in blood sugar thing, because I just find that so many athletes are really preoccupied with this. And I guess the assumption is that, or this belief is that all blood sugar increases or spikes are bad, or that it's this negative thing, when in reality, it really is this like normal physiological response. And it really is important to differentiate between both like acute and chronic glucose elevations, right? So can you maybe elaborate on this a little bit more, just to kind of clear this up for some people who are just like terrified of their sugar spiking all the time?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of companies that are coming out and they're pushing the narrative that blood sugar spiking is bad, and as well as different proponents of certain low carb diets, because the low carb diet's not going to spike blood sugar as much. But our body, if we have appropriate insulin response, like our body regulates our blood sugar in a really tight range. So it's fine to have our blood sugar spike. What we don't want is over time we have profound blood sugar spikes and then that blood sugar staying elevated. So that chronic elevation, because too much sugar in the blood over time kind of acts like sandpaper to the blood vessel walls. But this isolated spiking after a meal is totally normal. And I think people are paying more attention to it because there are companies that are like pushing that this is something they need to be concerned about, when it's just not true. And if we actually follow the narrative that our blood sugar should never spike, then we should never do high intensity activity, because any sort of sprinting, heavy weight training, even certain distances of activity levels can make blood sugars rise and stay elevated during activity level, because the body's trying to mobilize fuel. Like it's trying to get more fuel to the working muscles. There was a great article in Outside Magazine a few years ago by Alex Hutchinson, I think. And they put a continuous glucose monitor on an elite male athlete. This was a guy who ran, while he was wearing a half marathon, in 1 hour flat, 30 something seconds. his blood sugar spiked up to what we would maybe consider like diabetes level blood sugars during that run. This was an elite athlete, very fit, healthy, non-diabetes, non-prediabetes. And so if we use that logic, then what he's doing is bad.
Yeah. And I think people are also like using blood sugar almost like scapegoating. It's just like it as an excuse where, they're like, oh, it must be this, it must be sugar, it must, whatever. And they're not really like doing a full self-assessment and looking at like all the other things that are going on. Yeah, exactly. Like zooming out and being like, am I eating enough? Am I eating consistently? Am I sleeping? Am I recovering well? Like, am I training in a smart way? Like, I mean, I always bring it back to basics in these episodes just because so many people, and I'm sure you see the same thing, some people just like aren't doing those things. But yeah, I think it's really easy to kind of latch on to this like thing that you're hearing about and reading about when in reality, it's a much more nuanced and complicated situation.
For sure.
All right. So you mentioned CGM. So I think it's actually a really good segue into kind of blood sugar monitoring, specifically in athletes. Maybe before we touch on CGM specifically, because I definitely want that to be part of our discussion, I just want to talk about carbs and the role of carbs in the athlete's diet. So both in everyday, but primarily also in just like our performance nutrition. Just because so many people, I don't know if you've had these clients that were like really resistant to taking gels, or there's like, oh, I'm scared to take these, these pure sugar things. And, they're just kind of resistant to that. They think it's bad. They demonize carbs, demonize sugar, all that. And just kind of how we talk to athletes and explain that, yes, like simple sugars obviously affect our blood sugar in different ways. And these quick sources of energy, they obviously are different than having a complex carb, having a starch and all of that, but like why it's important. And also like, but more in the framework of like how our body responds to it in exercise. So maybe like starting, in that performance nutrition aspect of like, hey, it's safe to take this. It's going to be okay. Like that's kind of maybe like if I were an athlete coming to you concerned about it, how would you kind of reassure your athlete that this is something that's not only important, but it's safe to be doing?
For sure. Yeah. I think I like to validate people's concerns that, of course, eating a lot of excess sugar, added sugar on a regular basis and in our everyday diet is probably not the best diet. But what I also see is that I do work with athletes who are very active. I mean, a lot of the runners that I'm working with, they're running 12, 15 plus hours a week, right? Like it's not like they're at the gym for 2 hours lifting and taking long rests. Like this is 15 hours a week of running on top of lifting and doing other things. And sometimes the recommendations that are made to the general public that might actually be legitimate recommendations just might not apply as much when you're that highly active. And so they latch on to things that just might not be appropriate for them. And if we look at the longstanding sports nutrition literature, it is very clear that from a performance standpoint, having a higher carb diet is very helpful for performance. And if we even compare during activity, your skeletal muscles are what are using the most sugar or glucose, like the simplest form of sugar. And that skeletal muscle can use up to 50-fold more glucose than at rest. So we are using a lot of glucose during activity. And so I actually used to be of the opinion that, yes, I would recommend a higher carb diet, but if someone wants to be lower carb for their personal preference, then I wouldn't push it. This would be like a personal preference thing. Like technically we don't, like from a survival standpoint, we don't need carbs to survive, but doesn't necessarily mean, right, that like we shouldn't be eating them. But with that, with kind of the taking in gels and those things, it's just not, if we even look at it from like an empirical standpoint, like what are you going to do? Bring quinoa on your run?
Yeah.
The digestion would be off. It'd be impractical. I know I'm making an extreme kind of comparison, but I also like to reassure people that we can really dial in nutrient dense and high fiber carbohydrates in their everyday diet and still have a very well balanced diet and still be using simple sugar things during their workouts. However, when I have folks that really don't want to use like more of the goo and then like the artificial colors and flavorings, I'm like, sure, yeah, like let's try to use other things then. Like if that's your preference and that's what you want, we can try to make the untapped maple syrup type stuff, the honey sticks, the like it is still simple sugar. But to circle back around to, I used to say that if you didn't want to, okay, I'm not going to push it. But now with some literature showing that there might be this other role that carbs are playing in athletes, where there was, I forget what year the study was published. I think it was a couple of years ago. It was over 100 people in the study that showed that in athletes, lower carb intake was associated with higher markers of bone resorption and lower ability to absorb iron. So now I'm of the opinion well, it sounds like in this scenario that higher carb intake isn't just good for performance. It might actually be playing some sort of other protective role in the body. And that's why we really need to prioritize them over kind of personal preference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I always say that there's a reason why sports nutrition products are formulated the way that they are. They're convenient, they're non-perishable for the most part, right? They're fast acting, easy to digest. There are a million options, so you can find one that works for you. I often am not always loving some of the marketing around some of these more quote unquote natural food based. Yeah. I mean, thankfully, Spring Energy is kind of out of the picture for the most part. But they're gone. But actually, side note, I have a client in Australia who wanted to try it again. I was like, please don't use this product. He's like, I just want to try it. And he's like, yeah, this is disgusting. The new version of awesome sauce. It's lumpy and weird, and I'm not using it. I'm like, I told you so, but sure. Why would you take avocado oil and MCT oil in a gel? But anyways, but there are some other ones. I mean, I even just got a sample from some random company that it's again, it's all natural food, real foods, whole foods and everything. If it works for you, fine, but these aren't necessarily better, superior. And then kind of what we talked about, there are, I think maybe you can speak to this a bit more. So I think a lot of people get confused by all the different forms of sugar. So whether it's maltodextrin or, glucose or fructose or brown rice syrup or whatever, there are a million forms of sugar in performance nutrition, but then there's also a million forms of sugar just in our food system. That's a separate topic. We won't talk about that now, but just in performance nutrition, maybe we can talk about that a little bit because yes, at the end of the day, sugar is sugar. Kind of, but also not, but also no. So it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So maybe you can take us through that a bit.
Yeah. Well, if we think about glucose, the simplest form of sugar that is in our blood, and we have about a teaspoon, 4 grams of sugar in our blood in total. So it's really not that much sugar in our blood if you think about it. Those are what are called monosaccharides. So it's a single sugar molecule. And then we have disaccharides. So these are going to be things like sucrose, so table sugar, and lactose, which is the sugar in milk. Maltose. Where do we find maltose again?
Oh God, I know, right? Where do we find maltose? Oh my God. I'm blanking. I don't think I've even said the word maltose in a really long time, since grad school.
Yeah.
That's funny. No one ever talks about maltose.
It's okay. Forget I said maltose.
Maltose is we don't care about you. No.
We don't care about it. Monosaccharides, sorry, fructose and galactose. So a lot of different sugars are various chains of these. And so they just get broken down maybe at different rates, we break down. And fructose is kind of one of the weird monosaccharides that gets broken down a little differently because it goes through the liver. But the end form of all of the carbohydrates is glucose in our body. I don't know if that answers or if that answered.
No, that's part of it. So that's part of it. I think, I think the other thing we can point out is how, when we talk about, 60 grams of carb per hour, part of that is dictated by what we can actually transport and absorb in the gut, right? So when we're starting to add if we're taking in glucose and then we add fructose, we can start to get more in, right? Yeah. So we can kind of maximize what we're taking in, and there's a different transporter and all of that. So if there's anything else that you feel is relevant when talking about different sugars, or does it matter? Other than that point of different sugars can sometimes allow you to take in more. Otherwise, do you think it matters for performance, for tolerance, for anything else?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the sports nutrition products are nice mixes of different sugars because as you mentioned that we have different transporters or different little doors or
bridges. Bridges over a river.
Whatever. That are specific to certain sugars. And so if you're taking in one sugar, then you're not going to maximize absorption because we can only absorb so much at once. But a lot of sports nutrition products, and honestly, even a lot of whole foods, are a natural mix of different things that unless you are doing ultra endurance, like you're probably going to diversify enough unless you are doing straight gel for like 100-miler. And then I'd be like, okay, like no one's going to do that. That's just a little, I think they would get taste fatigue on that, but we're going to get a variety. Even if you look at things like dates, like some of these whole food sources, they have a variety of different sugars in them. But sports nutrition products are formulated to give you a balance of, or most are, if they're good, to give you a balance of the different sugars for sure. But that's all I'm kind of thinking about. In that
no, that's great. No, that's fine. I mean, I think sometimes people are a little more aware and reading ingredient lists or labels and looking at things and they're like, what does this mean? Like, what is maltodextrin and what is this? And does it matter? And blah, 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 and like always, you're kind of looking out for, just to see, okay, do I tolerate this product? Maybe it's like, hey, look out for sugar alcohols because that might cause some issues, right? In many people, although sugar alcohols are normally not in gels so much. They might be in other stuff.
Candy. Because I like,
oh yes, yeah.
End up being a candy, even candy that like isn't advertised as a lower carb. Because candy, I have noticed sometimes they will also have sugar alcohols in them because a lot of folks, right, will use candy during runs or races or
gum. Hopefully, no one's. I've seen people chewing gum sometimes while running. I'm like, what are you doing?
Like, could be caffeine gum because they absorb.
Yeah, okay. Yes, that's fine. That's fine. But if you're chewing normal gum with sugar alcohol, like that's not a good idea.
Yeah. I am actually very sensitive to chewing gum before running. Like I can't do it.
I can't chew gum at all anytime. Like it just messes me up. Yeah, I used to chew gum when I was younger and now I do it and it's just like, I don't know. I think I'm just very sensitive to sugar alcohols now. But
yeah, I'm not sensitive unless it is like within a couple hours before a run. And working at clinic after lunch, I will always chew gum for a little bit because I'm talking with patients. I usually bring something garlicky or
yeah. That's very kind of you.
Well, and now I mask in the fall and winter, so also I don't want to smell
your own breath. Yeah. Well, I guess you can always do a mint or a mouthwash or brush your teeth. Yeah. Some other ideas. Yeah. Okay, cool. I think that I had another thought. I always have a train of thought and I lose it, but I think that's good. Does anything else kind of come to mind maybe outside of exercise when it comes to sugars, sugar intake, concerns, anything like that?
Yeah, I would say that from just a sugar perspective and added sugars, when you are highly active, and I don't know, this might be a bad analogy for someone who is in a throngs of disordered eating, but I have yet to find a better explanation or how I look into things. When you have high energy expenditure, like athletes do, you have high energy turnover, right? In your body. You were burning through lots of calories. When your caloric budget, for lack of a better term, is very high, then your sugar, for lack of a better term, tolerance is going to be higher because now we can meet our protein and our, fiber needs and our vitamins and minerals with this much. And then we have a whole lot of other budget left to spare that can be added sugars and not be detrimental to our health. When I have a 50-something-year-old sedentary petite woman who her energy needs are like 1,400, 1,500 calories a day, there's not a lot of room there for added sugar because now so much percentage of that diet needs to be made up of meeting our fiber and our iron, our micronutrients, our protein, that there's just not a lot of room. And I hate to use the word budget, but I don't know. That's just how I think of it. And so for lack of a better explanation, I feel like athletes just have a higher sugar tolerance because they have higher energy expenditure. And I'm not suggesting that we earn our food through exercise. That's not what I'm saying. It's just looking at this from a mathematical energy expenditure perspective, but I'm curious.
No, that makes sense. No, I know. I totally get what you're saying. It's like kind of like, hey, you need to meet this threshold in order to make sure you're getting, you're hitting your protein goals and your carb goals and all your things. And if you are a smaller bodied person and you're less active, then yeah, you don't have as much extra, you don't have that to play around with as much, right? Now, will there be days where maybe you're just not meeting all of your needs perfectly? Of course. And like that's where we're like,
Totally.
hey, it doesn't matter. Like you'll be fine. Like zoom
Yes.
out and like, let's not like please listeners do not stress about this.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Averages.
Like, yeah. Like we look at averages here. Like if your, day or two or whatever is like not great, like you'll survive, you'll be okay. Your body
For
is very
sure.
resilient and amazing. And then, yeah, for athletes, it makes sense. Like, especially like, if I take one of my like Ironman athletes that just has like tremendous, like thousands and thousands of calories that we're trying to put in, like, yeah, you're trying to get calories from anywhere you can get them, like at a certain point, they're drinking calories, you're drinking all kinds of stuff, you're eating whatever. I mean, not that we're just like eating anything, but there's a lot more wiggle room and flexibility because, as you said, like you're just trying to get so many calories in. It's a lot easier to kind of meet your needs and then go above and beyond that. Today's show is brought to you by my virtual private practice, Eat for Endurance. I've been working with a wide range of active people for over a decade now to help them feel their best in their everyday and athletic lives, and I would absolutely love to help you as well. I have services to fit many different needs and budgets. If you haven't grabbed all of my free nutrition downloads yet, go to my website, eatforendurance.com, and do that right now. You'll get some really great guides on a variety of everyday and sports nutrition topics for $0. I have a new nutrition membership as well called Fuel for Life Crew. That's just $30 a month, where you'll get to join a small but growing community of busy, active people just like you and have access to me to answer all your nutrition questions. You also get all my normally paid nutrition resources, that's included, plus live monthly calls on different topics that you helped choose, and all of my past and future masterclasses. And of course, if you need more personalized support, I also work one-to-one with nutrition clients. In one-to-one coaching, we explore your unique history, we assess you as a whole person in the context of your busy life, and strategize how to achieve realistic, sustainable health and performance goals. We deep dive into everyday eating, sports nutrition, gut health, lab work, body image, and whatever else you need to feel and perform your best. If you're wondering what my past clients have to say about me, just go over to my testimonial page on eatforendurance.com and you can read all about it. All right, back to the episode. The mechanism of how our body uses sugar going into exercise, there are a few things that we can touch on here. So reactive hypoglycemia is sometimes something we deal with, right? And then the other thing, maybe just to take a step back before we even go there, when we are sedentary versus when we are exercising, how that gel would impact us differently. Maybe you can just explain the mechanism.
Yeah, whenever we take in a gel when exercising, it's probably not going to spike blood sugar as high because you are very glucose greedy in that moment. Like your muscles are wanting to gobble up that sugar to use. Whereas if we're sedentary and taking in that gel, our blood sugar is still going to spike, but it's still going to spike within a normal range. So it's possibly could be spiked a little bit higher than if that gel was taken within or shortly before exercise. This is why we have insulin to help us, and among other mechanisms, to help us keep that sugar in a tight range. So if I were to chug a soda right now, like a full real sugar soda, my blood sugar is going to spike, but it's going to come right back down because insulin's doing its job. And this leads me to share that I think there's also a discussion or a narrative about blood sugar crashes that I think is spoken about in a not quite accurate or inappropriate way. So when people say, oh, like you eat a simple carb thing and then your blood sugar spikes and you have a crash and that's bad. In the general sense, most people are not crashing when they eat something in simple sugar. And in fact, we want our blood sugar to come back down rapidly. If our blood sugar was not coming back down rapidly, that would be a problem. That could be indicative of insulin resistance. And so we want the blood sugar to spike and we want it to come right back down. That is normal. Where someone could have a low blood sugar, so that is something that can happen in non-diabetes population where they feel shaky and sweaty, maybe ravenously hungry, maybe they feel cognitively impaired a little bit. That might be low blood sugar, but that might also just be hunger and you've gone too long without eating. And so there's a lot of narrative of people saying, I think my blood sugar is low, and it's very possible, but it could also be, when was the last time you ate? Like, has it been 5+ hours? Your blood sugar might not be low, but you might be having those symptoms because it's a symptom of hunger. So I like to put that out there because I think sometimes it's easy to pathologize and think that there's something wrong when we've lost the big picture. And yeah, but in terms of like, I don't know if you wanted to go into the rebound or reactive hypoglycemia.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful. I mean, this isn't as common. I don't see it that often, but once in a while I'll get someone who has this issue or has read about it and is concerned about it.
Yeah.
And again, kind of what I'm trying to do here is like give athletes some reassurance.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of athletes now are just so into, hey, let's just do this. I want to fuel. I want to take these gels. I want to do it. But there's still people out there that aren't so sure. Maybe they're taking the gels and they're like, is this really a good idea? Like, I know it makes me feel better, but like, what is the impact on my health? And like, you know, so part of like what I'm trying to accomplish here is just giving reassurance to these different groups of people about why this is something that's helpful, you know, and not harmful for the most part.
And I've come across, so the concept of like reactive hypoglycemia is that we eat, in particular, we eat something carbohydrate and then our blood sugar goes too low. What can happen is that we have a particularly like a big, for lack of a better term, a big bolus of carbohydrate. And if we remember what insulin is doing, insulin is helping to pull sugar out of the bloodstream. Sometimes highly active people have really, really great insulin responses, and the body will release just too much insulin. So we pull too much sugar out of the blood and it causes a low blood sugar. This is just so few and far between. And even for like an athlete population, I think I've seen 2 people with it. Like my 9 years as a dietitian.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I see a lot of reactive hypoglycemia at my clinic because that's who you consult, or the endocrinologist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's most common in a bariatric population. So post-bariatric surgery,
Yep.
they're at much higher risk of having this reactive hypoglycemia, which makes sense. There's been some changes to their digestive tract. Like
a little bit.
Anatomically, just a little bit. Yeah. They're cutting through the stomach and rerouting the small intestines. Like, things are
very confusing for the body.
But so I don't think it's something that someone needs to worry about. If they notice that they were having symptoms like, oh, wow, like I ate or I chugged a bunch of sports drink before my activity, or had a gel or anything simple carb, and they all of a sudden feel that shaky, sweaty 15, 20, 30 minutes later and feel those symptoms, that would be someone who I would want to screen for reactive hypoglycemia. But if you're not experiencing that, it's a non-issue.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. Okay, let's talk about, this is a little bit, well, slightly off topic, but somewhat related, kind of that energy crash or slump or whatever you want to call it after a meal or in the afternoon that so many people complain about, and they're running to grab a coffee or whatever. So they have eaten recently, but they're just feeling like really just, ugh. Can you like go into that at all about why that happens, if that is connected to blood sugar or not?
So it could be a couple different things. So one thing that I typically see happen is the energy slump in that kind of 3 to 5 o'clock range is people backload their calories.
Yes.
They're not eating enough earlier in the day. And so by 3 o'clock, we're really tired when this actually could have been accomplished maybe with a higher energy breakfast. Maybe that means morning snack, lunch, and then now it's time for afternoon snack. Or for folks who work jobs where like, I can't have a snack. Like I literally, I get my my lunch break and that's it. Okay, well, maybe we need to really look at breakfast and lunch and see how we can bulk that up. So that could be it. Or if you did have a really big lunch and you ate a lot of food, your body is diverting blood flow to your digestive tract to help with digestion. And that can make you feel tired and sluggish. And so it could be either end of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, those shaky, sweaty, possibly ravenously hungry, foggy, that combination could be blood sugar related. But if it's just kind of general fatigue, feeling kind of foggy, brain foggy, it's probably just more like under eating related.
Yeah. And I mean, the reason why I brought it up is because so many people are like, oh, it's because I ate so many carbs. That's why. Because then I crashed after eating all these carbs. Like, right? Have you heard that? Like, everyone's like blaming carbs. I'm like, really? Do we have to blame the carbs all the time? Like, can we just take a look at all the other things?
Yeah, and I think it's just lack of awareness, right? Like, you don't know what you don't know. And I've even seen sometimes people say, well, it's high carb. And you're like, actually, your meal was not just high carb. Like, this was high carb, high fat. And
Yeah.
we delayed. Now we have a big fat load in our stomach that's taking a lot longer to digest. Like, it actually could be just that magical combination that's affecting
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about CGMs. CGMs are, I don't know if I would say they're all the rage. I think they've been around for a while now, so I don't know, maybe you can comment on that, but they're definitely still being talked about. I still get, a coach here and there being like, should this person be on a CGM, or, just other CGM talk. Yeah. So they were originally used among diabetics, and like with many things that are in the medical world, they get pulled out and used in athletes, right? So they found their way into the athletic space. And I would love to hear, what is your take on CGMs? Maybe you can go through some pros and cons.
Yeah. So first, we'll just maybe define it. It's a
Yes, perfect.
Continuous glucose monitor. So this is a device that you insert in your skin, and it leaves a kind of thread-like projection in the interstitial area. So the interstitial area is not quite your bloodstream. It's like outside of the cells, and it's measuring not blood sugar. Technically, it's interstitial sugar. I can tell you the differences. It takes this blood sugar reading every 1 to 5 minutes, depending on which CGM you're wearing. This Bluetooths to your phone, and it gives you real-time data of your blood sugar trends. These things are an absolute game changer for people with diabetes to keep their blood sugar in target range. And like you mentioned, now as the cost has gone down, they're becoming more popular to use outside of the diabetes realm. However, the data we have for their use outside of like pre-diabetes and diabetes is not very strong. So there's some studies I've looked at, can we use CGMs to help people with weight loss? And I think one of the studies, I haven't read it in a while, one of the studies showed it helped in a sense that, again, people were looking to avoid spiking their blood sugar. And so if you know a food's going to spike your blood sugar, you're not going to eat it. But that doesn't mean that if my blood sugar is spiking, that I'm not going to lose weight, because we can have a high carb diet and spike blood sugar and be losing weight. We can have a high carb diet and spiking blood sugar and be gaining weight. So from a fat loss perspective, we can't just look at blood sugar and know this is going to help with weight loss or not. So that's one area that they're being used for. And then the other area is emerging evidence, or maybe actually not emerging evidence, currently being studied for possible use in endurance and ultra endurance fueling. That if we can help keep blood sugars high during exercise, can we use this data to help us fuel better? So that's the other area. The problem with that area is we also don't have a lot of data. And we're seeing elite athletes wearing these. And I think it's more in the context of there being a part of research studies, which is great. But then when you see an elite athlete wearing something, now you want it.
Yeah. Are there... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to say, like, are there times where you feel like it might be appropriate or helpful? And are there times where it's more confusing and counterproductive?
I think overall, I'm very hesitant to recommend them outside of blood sugar concerns, like a prediabetes standpoint, because we don't have established guidelines of what this information can help us with.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this a lot, but information can be a tool or it can be a weapon. And what I found is when people wear them and they don't have an understanding of normal blood sugar response, they can get afraid if the blood sugar spikes. And so if we're going to wear something that's giving us data, we need to know what we're going to do with that data. And a lot of these companies that have come out with their own CGMs, I actually had someone recently. She was actually a 50-something-year-old with prediabetes, ultra endurance athlete, strong family history of diabetes. She wore one, and it was an account I wasn't familiar with, and I logged in, and it had its own target set for what normal blood sugar is. And it was not an evidence-based range. It gave a very, very tight range. Again, kind of to reinforce we shouldn't have our blood sugar spike. We need to have it flatlined. So that was inappropriate. And then it would have like pop-ups of like recommendations. And one of the things said, if you don't spike your blood sugar above X target, you will lose weight. Like that is literally verbatim what it said. I'm like, this makes zero
What?
sense.
Yeah.
Bodybuilders have been using high carb diets for weight loss for years. This isn't even true. So I'm very hesitant to recommend them. I think that as more research is done on them, and then in a non-diabetes population, we'll find out a lot more information. Especially, I'm interested to know how that relates to underfueling. Like, will we see people who are underfueled tend to be very low normal blood sugar? Like, is the body just barely keeping blood sugar at like the bottom end because there's just not enough extra stores to help it? So I think there could be some cool clinical applications to it. Or who knows, maybe someday they will find established guideline of, okay, you're wearing this during your race. If your blood sugar falls below 120, you need to eat something. Like maybe that will end up being something that exists, but we don't have that data to back it up. So then we just need to fuel based on what established guidelines we already have for fueling.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I haven't had a chance to wear one or try one out, so I have like no idea what that's like or, getting all that information. I mean, the closest I've come, which is not even close at all, is back in, nutrition school where, where you're just like pricking your finger and taking like the little blood prick test and testing your blood sugars. But I think it's very interesting, but it kind of goes into this whole category of all those devices out there, which, it can be nice, but I think for the most part, I think it can fall more into the confusing, counterproductive category, especially when athletes are using these things and not really seeking out professional guidance. Right. So they're just like, they just get all of this information and they're just like, well, what do I do with this now? Like, what is this actually telling you? Or they're listening to, these, little pop-ups or things that are telling them things that like simply aren't true. So I think it can be a little bit concerning and risky to be trusting some of these things where, as you said, like, they aren't really evidence-based and they could be giving you false information. So yeah, I have not yet recommended a CGM to any of my clients because at least there's been no one in my population that really needed one. Again, we're usually working on some pretty basic stuff to, in the first place and going from there. Yeah. Is there anything else kind of relating to blood sugars that you think is important for athletes to know? And by the way, when I'm saying athletes, like it doesn't have to be like that person you were describing in the 12 to 15 hour of running range. Actually, maybe that's a place we can explore briefly. Talking about the recreational athlete who is not maybe an ultra endurance athlete. Maybe it's someone who is just exercising very consistently and regular. Maybe they're doing 45 minutes to an hour every day or 5 days a week. So they're active. They're very active, but not like excessively so or anything. Does any of this change? Do they need to be concerned about any of this stuff? Sometimes these people, I encounter even more resistance or fear around carbs and sugar and weight stuff and all of that. So I don't know if there's any other messaging you want to send to this group in particular.
Yeah, I think that the CGM use of, executing caution with use still stands. If there's a clinical indication for use, such as maybe the blood sugar screened elevated from a fasting plasma glucose or hemoglobin A1C perspective, yeah, it could be really helpful to use one under the guidance of someone who can interpret the data. Unfortunately, I will say not all primary care providers are proficient in reading blood sugars. These things still aren't even readily used by primary care, the CGMs. They're really used more with diabetes specific providers, so more endocrinology. So sometimes those doctors won't even want to prescribe one. And there's kind of a rule in medicine that if you don't know how to interpret a lab, then don't order it.
Mm.
So if you don't know how to interpret data on the CGM, then your doctor's not going to want to prescribe one for you. And then what can happen is then folks might go to one of these independent companies that aren't required by a prescription that might have their own target set and might have those inappropriate recommendations that aren't evidence-based. So
yeah. And what about, yeah. And what about just like general, like kind of going full circle back to the discussion we were having about sugars more generally speaking. So whether it's performance nutrition or sugars in the diet, simple carbs, all of that. Again, in this group that is still active, but maybe they're not training for an endurance event or anything, because sometimes, again, as I said, it's this population that is expressing more concern about simple carbs or that kind of stuff. Is there any other messaging you want to send to this group more about kind of performance nutrition or everyday eating?
Yeah, carbohydrates are a healthy macronutrient. We don't need to over restrict carbohydrates. And in fact, I think they get inappropriately demonized, even with diabetes risk, when the literature is quite pushing towards that. A diet that's overall high in refined sugars, refined carbs, think ultra processed things, but also high in fat and saturated fat is a risk factor for prediabetes and diabetes. But that carbohydrates in the presence of a lower fat diet don't seem to be tied to as much risk. So I don't think we need to be demonizing or being afraid of carbohydrates as much as a lot of influencers suggest in the space.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anything else you want to add to this discussion that you think is important for my listeners to know? Or you think we covered it?
I think one other thing that I would like to point out with CGM use is that glucometers have a margin of error. CGMs have a margin of error. They're about in the 8% range. Those numbers are never going to line up, and they're actually said to be maybe not quite as accurate in non-diabetes population because our blood sugar is a little more stabilized, that it's harder for the sensors to read because we don't have as many peaks and valleys in our numbers. So if we even just add to that, like there could be a level of inaccuracy, right? No tech is perfect. That just kind of reinforcing that if you don't need one.
Yeah. No, definitely. I'm not pushing that.
Yeah.
I think it's such a better investment to, hey, get regular lab work done, pay attention to how you're feeling, like eat consistently and adequately, eat balanced meals and snacks. I mean, again, all the boring stuff, right? Then investing in the latest gadget. I think that's really going to get you a lot further along in whatever your goals may be. All right. I'm going to do some quick bites questions and then I will send you on your way. What is your favorite post-race meal or snack?
Oh man, Cane's chicken. So
Cane's chicken. What is that?
It's a chain.
A chain. Okay.
It's a chain, but I think it's more maybe Midwest, but we now have them in Utah. It's fried chicken, but
yum.
It's really solid fried chicken. Like it's always like the consistency is like very juicy fried chicken, but it's fast food.
Yeah.
And it always comes with cane sauce and you get fries and the Texas toast. Like that.
What is Texas toast?
Oh my gosh. It's like
I'm in California. I know nothing about this.
Oh my gosh. Okay. It's like really, really thick white bread that they usually like slather with butter and then they gently like put it on the flat top stove. So it's
Yum.
So that's my favorite post race.
Yeah. You can't go wrong with bread and butter. Like that's just yum. And what is your biggest cooking catastrophe if you've ever had one?
Oh man, there's probably a lot. The other day I tried to make cookies and I'd done one thing in advance, some dry ingredients, and I was doubling it. And then the next day I continued on my cookie making journey and I didn't double the wet ingredients. And then as I was mixing them together, I realized that the dry was double. So I re-beat the butter and the sugar. Like I took everything out of the mixer. I re-beat the sugar and the butter, like creamed it, and then added the egg, like the other half. And it ended up taking me like an hour and a half to make cookies. And but
were they good at least?
They were great. Yeah.
What kind of cookies do you make?
Brown butter cardamom cookies.
Ooh, those sound delicious.
They're
yum.
Really good. Yeah.
Do you ever bring those? I know like sometimes like cookies are good for, wait, is it snowing yet by you? Like, are you doing any ski stuff?
Mm-hmm. Kind of, we're forecasted to not have a good snow year. And so we're behind right now. I've got one day under my belt, whereas like the last 2 years I started skiing end of October. So.
Okay. Like would something like that be like a, bring with you kind of goodie, or is that more just for home?
Probably more just for home. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Yeah. Worst race nutrition experience.
Oh, my first ultra, I brought a beef stick.
Oh God.
And then I
Why?
inhaled it. I was like, just get that. I thought that I would get that I would start to get really sweet averse.
Oh,
And
yeah. Okay, I can see that.
so, but it was on the flat section, so my pace was increasing, and I basically inhaled. You know, you're like chewing a freaking beef stick, like, and I inhaled some of it, and then I like gagged. Yeah.
Oh God.
No beef
Oh.
sticks.
No beef sticks. I struggle with those things. I know people like love those as snacks. Like, I guess I can do a little beef jerky and turkey jerky sometimes, but the actual little sticks, like chomps or whatever those things people
Chomps, yeah.
Chomps. Yeah, I don't know what it is. Like, I like salami. Something about the beef sticks, I just can't do it. I don't know. But hey, if that's your thing. Yeah, but if that's your thing, you know, like Epic Bar, I'm just like, I can't do it. But I know for some people, they're all about it. So I won't yuck anyone's yum. What is the most exotic or interesting food you've ever tried?
Oh gosh, I feel so uncultured. I don't feel like I haven't like traveled to Asia. Like I haven't had that many, like maybe.
Well, it says exotic or interesting. So maybe it's something that was just an interesting combo.
You know, I had uni for the first and only time, sea urchin. It was Nobu in Dallas. And
oh, cool.
Didn't like it.
Didn't like it.
For me. No more uni, even if it's
no more uni.
Boat.
Hey, at least, yeah, you can check that box. How do you like your eggs cooked if you eat eggs?
Over easy or scrambled.
What are your comfort foods other than fried chicken?
That's hard. Tacos. Like
tacos are the best.
Tacos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Something vanilla based or coffee based.
And last question, top 3 items of gear that are most essential to your active lifestyle. Hard for you because you do lots of things.
Oh my gosh, what a question. Yeah.
You can choose winter and like the rest of the year if you want.
I have a very weird foot. I have a very wide forefoot and a very narrow heel. Very hard to fit me for running shoes. The Lululemon Beyond Field trail shoe has been a godsend.
I haven't tried their shoes. Interesting. Okay.
I was very skeptical, right? Any like apparel company that gets into the shoe game, you're kind of stick with it. No.
Yeah.
No, I'm buying my second pair. They're amazing.
Cool.
I actually did like a very technical Via Ferrata in them too, and they held up really great.
Oh, were you in Italy?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I think I saw that on Instagram and I was so jealous. I've always wanted to go there, like to that section of Italy.
You've got to do it. It's
looks so beautiful.
Altavia too.
Look it up. So cool.
Listeners too. Put it on your list of things to go do because it's incredible.
Yeah, very, very cool. Well, thank you so much, Hayden, for coming on the show and chatting with us all about blood sugar. Where can everyone find you if they want to look you up and work with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's at Satiate Nutrition, and Satiate is spelled SATIATE, and then satiatenutrition.com. I have an application if you want to work with me for nutrition coaching. And thank you so much for having me on, Claire. This is super fun.
Yeah, and you also do like recipes, or you do something with recipes, right? That you send out.
Yeah, I have it's like a meal planning subscription. I should just entitle to a recipe subscription service. It's $13 a month, and it just dumps 25 recipes into your inbox every month. But if you work with me for one-on-one coaching, you get a subscription to that for the duration of us coaching. So my coaching minimum is 3 months. So you end up with at least 75 recipes, and it's all like seasonal. So, and it's just trying to help you with some meal planning. So yeah.
Do you make those recipes yourselves, or are you using like a service to kind of help you with it?
I use a software, and then I'm noticing that I'm inputting more and more of my own. Yeah. So it's kind of a mix of what's in the software available and what I want to add to it.
Awesome. Love that. Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, Hayden. It was so great chatting with you, and I'm so glad we finally got this on the calendar. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your year.
Thank you. You as well.
That's our show for today. Before you go, I have a huge favor to ask. If you are enjoying this podcast, would you be willing to share it with a friend or on social media? I would also appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating and review, and be sure to hit follow or subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss an episode. Lastly, I have some affiliate codes that you can use to help support my free content. You can use Eat for Endurance 20 over at Scratch Labs if you're a first-time customer, and Eat for Endurance 15 if you enjoy momentous products. I have other codes on the shop page of my website, eatforendurance.com. I also have a Patreon page that I have linked to in the show notes, which I would love to see you join. And as always, please feel free to get in touch to give any feedback or topic requests, or just to say hi. I would love to hear from you, Claire at eatforendurance.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you all next time.